Thank you. We're now going to move on to the next item of business, which is a statement from the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, on COVID-19. The First Minister will take questions at the end of her statement. I would encourage all members who wish to ask a question to press their request to speak buttons, and I call on the First Minister.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. I will give a report on today's statistics and then a short update on some other issues. The total number of positive cases reported yesterday, this has already been published this afternoon, was 2,045. That represents 11.3% of the total number of tests, and the total number of confirmed cases is now 124,831. That is obviously a significant number of new cases, a record high indeed for a single day, and it demonstrates the severity of the situation that we face right now. 1,133 people are currently in hospital, that's 41 more than yesterday, and 69 people in intensive care, which is 4 more than yesterday. I'm also sad to report that 43 additional deaths have been registered in the past 24 hours of patients who had tested positive. In total, 137 deaths have been registered in the past 7 days, and that takes the total number of deaths under the daily measurement to 4,510. National Records of Scotland have not published their usual weekly update today because not all registration offices have been open throughout the festive period. However, the figures published last week showed that the total number of deaths is now over 6,000. Each one of those deaths is heartbreaking, and so again I want to send my condolences to everyone who has lost a loved one. There are 3 issues I want to cover today. The first is the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine that has earlier today been authorised for supply in the UK by the medicines regulator. That is obviously extremely good news. It means that there are now 2 effective COVID vaccines available for use in the UK. The Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine is logistically easier to deliver than the Pfizer one, and crucially, the UK has secured a much higher number of doses of this vaccine. It's also now recommended that the second dose of both vaccines can be given up to 12 weeks after the first rather than 3. That means we can now prioritise providing a first dose to as many people as possible rather than providing the required 2 doses in as short a time as possible, and that will allow more people to be vaccinated more quickly. We have been preparing for the deployment of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine for some time, and I can confirm that it will be administered in Scotland from Monday, the 4th of January. As of Sunday, more than 92,000 people had already received their first shot of the Pfizer vaccine, but today's news means that more people will get their first dose of a COVID vaccine much sooner than originally anticipated. The second issue I want to touch on are the restrictions now in place across the country. On Boxing Day, Orkney, Shetland and the Western Isles and some other island communities moved to level 3 protections. However, at the same time, the rest of Scotland, which is, of course is the vast majority, moved to level 4. That's not the way any of us wanted to end 2020 or indeed start the new year, but these new restrictions do reflect the severity of the threat that is posed by this new variant. Analysis done by Public Health Scotland shows that yesterday, 42.8% of positive tests processed for Scotland in the Lighthouse laboratory network had the S-gene dropout that is indicative of this new strain. That's higher than the 38% suggested by ONS analysis for the week beginning 14th December, and that in turn compared to just 6% at the end of November. So this new strain appears to be fast becoming the dominant one circulating in Scotland. And that is obviously a cause for real concern, given that it is thought to be significantly more transmissible. As I indicated before Christmas, the severity of this challenge means that we simply cannot rule out the need for restrictions that are even tighter than those in the current level 4. We continue to assess the situation carefully, indeed on a daily basis, and we will keep Parliament updated should any changes be required over the remainder of the festive period. As we learn more about the new variant, we also continue to review when pupils can safely return to classrooms. The new strain has already made a normal scheduled return impossible, but we continue to assess whether it will be possible to reopen schools as planned on the 18th of January. That is what I think we all want, and to be clear, that remains our planning assumption. But we will continue to put the safety of pupils, teachers and staff first, and of course we will ensure as much notice as possible to parents of any changes we consider to be necessary. For now, of course, it is vital that we all do as much as possible to suppress transmission. That means limiting our interactions with people in other households beyond those which are absolutely essential. And to remind everyone, our very strong advice right now is that people should be staying at home just as much as possible. And when we do go out, we should stay as close to home as possible. With a few limited exceptions for essential purposes, none of us should be visiting each other's homes right now. None of us should be travelling to other local authority areas, again, unless it is for an essential purpose. And there must be no non-essential travel between Scotland and other parts of the UK, and that advice also applies to overseas travel. We should also, of course, remember the FACT's advice on face coverings, avoiding crowded places, cleaning hands and surfaces, keeping 2 metres distance from people from other households, and self-isolating and getting tested immediately if you have symptoms. Let me take the opportunity to stress that testing centres are open throughout the entire festive period. So if you do experience COVID symptoms, please don't wait, book a test immediately. It is really important that you do so. It's also worth noting that the NHS 24 Mental Health Hub is also open right throughout the festive period. Support of this kind, I think, is particularly vital at a time when so many of us are missing our loved ones and, of course, missing normal social interaction. So if you feel the restrictions are affecting your mental health right now, and if you need help or advice, please don't hesitate to call the number at 111. Finally, today, Presiding Officer, I want to say a few words about Hogmanay tomorrow. I know most of us, and I certainly speak for myself here, will be very glad to see the back of 2020. And today's news about the new vaccine should, and I think will, give all of us greater hope for the year ahead. But for now, it is really vital to do everything we can to suppress this virus, particularly given the risk of the new variant. That's important to keep ourselves and our loved ones safe and to protect the NHS. So we must mark this new year responsibly and in line with the restrictions in place. To be clear, and I take no pleasure in saying this, that means no gatherings, no house parties, no first footing. Instead, we should bring in 2021 in our own homes with just our own households. This new strain is very serious, and I cannot stress that enough. And our prospects for the rest of the new year will be better if we get it off to a safe start. So I urge everyone to be responsible in Hogmanay. I know it's hard, and it is particularly hard for young people, but it is how we best protect ourselves and our loved ones, and it helps the NHS too, and they do need our help just now. In Scotland, so far, the numbers in hospital and ICU are not at the peak of the first wave, but the NHS is under pressure. So everything we do as individuals to stop the virus spreading helps reduce the number of people who will end up in hospital and ICU beds over the next few weeks. And that really matters, obviously, for a number of reasons. So as this awful year draws to a close, let me again thank everyone across the country for your sacrifice and patience and for looking out for each other. We do have every reason to believe that the spring of 2021 will bring better times, but we must first get through these difficult few weeks of winter. So let's stick with it and keep looking after each other. And let me end by wishing everybody across the chamber and at home, when it comes, a better, brighter and happier new year.
Thank you very much, First Minister. We'll now turn to questions. Ruth Davidson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank the First Minister for advance notice of her statement. We will all welcome the news of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine being approved and look forward to Scotland's share of the 100 million doses which have already been purchased by the UK Government being delivered. But despite this positive development of a vaccine becoming available with fewer logistical challenges than the Pfizer one, people across Scotland will be concerned by the rising rates of transmission caused by the new variant of COVID and its advance to becoming the dominant strain here. That troubling news makes today's vaccine announcement so welcome and so timely. And people will want information. On the 23rd of December, a list of vaccination centres was published, which included hospitals, clinics and GP surgeries across Scotland, intended for use from January to vaccinate all over 80s not resident in care homes. We must be hopeful that this next phase of vaccination can be concluded as quickly as possible and that we can move on to wider cohorts of the population. That will almost certainly require a greater level of infrastructure than that which was announced. So can the First Minister update us on the work being undertaken to identify and secure venues for mass vaccinations and when a list of these venues will be published? We also know that the national figure of trained vaccinators is at around 4,000 people. But obviously, every health board will need enough staff to deliver across their region. So can I ask the First Minister what confidence she has that each area has the staff that they need? And can she publish a breakdown of the numbers of trained vaccinators by health board?
First Minister.
Yes, we will look to publish updates on all of that to Parliament as soon as possible, and then on an ongoing basis as regularly as possible. I have confidence both in the centres and the infrastructure in terms of where the vaccine will be delivered, and also in our estimates of the numbers of people available to do that. When I say I have confidence, we take nothing for granted, and there's not an ounce of complacency. I and the Health Secretary are receiving daily updates on the progress of the vaccination programme, which is going well so far, but we need to make sure that we can pick up the pace of that to meet the increased supply that we are now likely to have with AstraZeneca coming on stream, but also the increased availability we will have because it is now not required to do 2 doses within a 3-week period, and that will give us the ability to vaccinate many more people much more quickly. We are still awaiting certainty on the delivery schedules for Oxford AstraZeneca, and therefore we will update as quickly as we can on what our expectations then are for timescales. As well as vaccine centres, one of the advantages of the new vaccine is that because it is logistically easier, it is more able to be got to GP practices, and that will allow us to make sure that we speed up the vaccination in the first instance of those over 80 who are not in care homes. So we take nothing for granted, but we will get people vaccinated as quickly as possible, and we will update Parliament as regularly as we can about our expectations as the certainty of delivery and the knowledge we have about that becomes more concrete, as I hope it will in the coming days.
Thank you very much. Richard Leonard.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We are at a critical moment in our response to the pandemic. The welcome approval of the Oxford vaccine announced today now means the challenge is to accelerate the vaccination programme, and with urgency. But the recent increase in cases and the spread of the new strain demands clear and rigorous control measures in the meantime. As the First Minister has said, teachers and other school staff are due to return to work in a few days' time, still without routine testing in place, without priority for vaccination, and still concerned about the January the 18th full return being safe. Parents will hear the First Minister's comments today and wonder if schools really will be able to return to face-to-face teaching after January the 18th. Many of them are worried about the implications of a return to home learning. So, can the First Minister tell us more about how and when she will engage with school staff and parents to address these genuine concerns? And can she be a bit clearer, if there are to be changes to schools, at what point would they be announced?
First Minister.
We do face a severe situation given the new strain, the fact that it is now becoming the dominant strain, and it is a strain that spreads more quickly. That's why it was so important that we took the very cautious and precautionary action. It's not that long ago that Richard Leonard was urging me to reduce restrictions here in the city of Edinburgh, for example. Yesterday, the implication of an article he wrote appeared to be that we should open pubs again. It's really important that we don't follow that kind of advice, but we take really cautious and sensible action to try to make sure that we do not allow this virus to transmit any further and any more quickly than it already is capable of doing. The decisions on schools are very sensitive and very important decisions for us to take. We have already, of course, taken some of those decisions to delay the return of schools for pupils to have the first week online learning as opposed to in-school learning. We want to see schools back normally on the 18th of January, but literally over the next few days we will be assessing the up-to-date situation, and if there are changes to that, as I said in my statement, we will set those out as early as possible to give parents as much notice of that as possible, and obviously to give teachers as much notice of that as possible. Final 2 points. We have been already, and the Health Secretary has already shared some details of this, working on plans for the greater use of testing within schools once the new term gets underway. And on vaccination, as I'm pretty sure Richard Leonard knows, it's not politicians and governments that decide the order of priority for vaccination. We accept recommendations from the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation. These are the experts that tell us, based on what they know about the protections that the vaccines give, what the correct order of priority is. And we'll continue to take those recommendations, and if they suggest a different order of priority, then we will reflect that in our planning.
Thank you very much. Patrick Harvey.
Thank you. I'm grateful for the advance sight of the statement, and like others, I stand in continued awe of those who've worked hard to make vaccines available on the timescale that they have. But we have clearly weeks and months rather than days and weeks to live with the current heightened danger from the pandemic. The First Minister's statement says that they will put the safety of pupils, teachers and staff first. Does this mean that they will place a higher priority on safety than on sticking rigidly with the pre-planned reopening dates? Because if we're putting safety first, then surely it's clear that schools shouldn't reopen until the virus is under control. And speaking of that pre-planned date, the First Minister says that the government continues to assess whether it would be possible. What metrics will be used as the basis for a decision on reopening? What additional safety measures have been identified which will be needed in schools to successfully address the risk posed by the new strain? Are these measures already being put in place, or are schools themselves unclear what these measures will be? And in relation to the last point, the First Minister just replied to Richard Leonard. What advice is the government receiving at the moment on whether teachers and school staff should have prioritised access to the newly increased vaccine capacity?
First Minister.
Firstly, we've always put safety first when it comes to schools and when it comes to the country more generally. Perfectly understandably, there will be differences of opinion in the case of schools between some teachers and the government about what putting safety first means. But safety has been and always will be the driving imperative. Part of the safety of children overall, of course, is having them as far as possible in full-time education, learning with their peers, as close to normal as possible. But we will not compromise on safety, and the figures around transmission in schools, both for young people and looking at, I think this is from memory, ONS analysis, COVID cases amongst teachers compared to other professions, suggest that we have been able to have schools open safely. This new strain changes some of these assumptions because of its faster spreading nature, and we have to take that into account. So in terms of the metrics we look at the overall rate of community transmission. Right from the outset of this, we have been very clear to say that that one of the conditions for schools being open in normal is community transmission that is under control. So that will be the judgment that we are making. But let me be very clear, the safety of pupils, of teachers, of other staff in our schools has always been paramount and always will be paramount. But part of what the rest of us have to do to try to make sure we have the conditions for schools being open is do all of these other things to suppress the virus, which was part of the point I was making to Richard Leonard. Part of the reason why we have to have some places that adults enjoy going to closed right now is part of that broader effort to suppress. On the advice around vaccination, the JCVI advice is published. It has the phase 1 order of priority. If the JCVI changes that, obviously teachers pressures will be in some of those categories in terms of some people with health conditions, but if that changes, then we will reflect that in our planning. And of course, once we go into the next phase, which is people under the age of 50, there will be advice then that we will consider on the order of priority around that. So we will continue to take advice and act on the basis of that advice, because that is what the experts say is the most sensible approach given what we know about this virus, this vaccine, and how it operates and the protections that it delivers.
Thank you. Willie Rennie, to be followed by Ruth Maguire.
The First Minister talked about the NHS being under pressure. I have a letter dated the 21st of December from John Connachan, the Interim Chief Executive of NHS Scotland, and it states that boards can pause all non-urgent elective and routine services during January and February. Now, the waiting lists and times are already very long, with people suffering pain and discomfort. So can the First Minister give us an indication as to how many boards she understands will be pausing all these services?
That will vary depending on the prevalence of the virus in different areas. We want that to be kept to a minimum. We want health boards and the health service generally to get back to normal as much as possible. The remobilisation of services process has been underway. Obviously, there is also a need to have greater infection prevention and control procedures in place during COVID, and therefore that will have continue to affect the numbers of patients being seen. But we are working with health boards to try to keep that process going while they also deal with and treat and care for patients with COVID. But that comes back to the central point. We will be more able to do that in every health board area and across the country as a whole if we get and keep the levels of infection down. Our health service is working under extreme pressure. I want to take the opportunity again today to thank everybody working in it. Many of them will never have experienced pressure like this. Right now, and this obviously is not something we can be complacent about, our bed numbers of COVID patients in hospital beds and in ICU are below the peak we saw in April. ICU particularly quite significantly below the peak. Hospital beds more generally less so, but still below that peak. If we suppress this and keep it suppressed or get it more suppressed, we can manage to continue that, and that then creates the space for us to open up and remobilise more of the services that NHS boards want to be doing.
Thank you. Ruth Maguire, to be followed by Jamie Green.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Equality and Human Rights Commission report published this month, Equality in Residential Care during COVID-19, has a number of recommendations for both government, health and social care partnerships and care homes themselves. They're all worthy of consideration and indeed action, but can I ask the First Minister specifically about visiting and family contact? Family relationships are so important for health, and I know we all understand the devastating impact isolation can cause people. The report recommends that all homes carry out person-centred risk assessments for each resident to ensure that visits can safely resume. Can I ask what the Scottish Government will do to ensure that this is happening in all homes at all times, so that the resumption and continuation of crucial family contact can go ahead?
First Minister.
I think everybody, without exception, is deeply sympathetic to the situation facing people who are desperate to see loved ones in care homes. And I want to again give an assurance that we are doing all we can to allow people to visit safely, while also ensuring the safety of residents, which again, I think everyone accepts is of vital importance. The visiting guidance is clear that care homes need to undertake a risk assessment prior to facilitating any form of visiting in their care home. In addition, care homes should undertake an assessment of the views and needs of each resident, and that should be documented within their care plan. With the move to level 4 for mainland areas, that means that visiting is restricted to essential visitors indoors and outdoor visiting, but it's important that essential visits continue to be supported. These include circumstances where it's clear that the person's health and well-being is changing for the worse, where visiting might help with communication difficulties or to ease significant personal stress or other pressing circumstances, and that obviously includes approaching end of life. So we will continue to approach all of these issues with the utmost sensitivity within what I know everybody accepts is an incredibly challenging situation, particularly for those working on the front line.
Jamie Green, to be followed by Stuart McMillan.
Thank you. The First Minister mentioned giving parents as much notice as possible on the plans for school, but the 18th is just 3 weeks away. So by what date will a final decision actually be made to allow parents to plan? And can we get confirmation today that the key worker hubs, which we welcome, will stay open for as long as they need to while schools are closed to all pupils? And if I could, does the government have any plans for mass asymptomatic testing of both pupils and staff in schools, colleges and universities? And if not, why not?
First Minister.
The arrangements for vulnerable children and children of key workers will remain in place for as long as that is necessary. I'm also always very grateful that people remind me of how many days there are between now and a particular date in the future. I'm acutely aware of this. I am acutely aware of the pressures that parents are under and their understandable and legitimate desire for as much certainty as possible. We are trying to balance a situation between doing what is required and not shying away from difficult decisions, but not taking decisions that will have a massive impact on young people and parents before we think those are necessary. But I've said, I think, twice today, and I'll say it again, we will give as much notice as possible, but we are literally assessing this situation on a daily basis. And I think some announcements are being made south of the border today about schools in England. All governments are in the same position here. But of course, whatever the situation is, the arrangements in place for vulnerable children and children of key workers require to continue and will continue.
Stuart McMillan, to be followed by Ian Gray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm aware of a paramedic who is concerned by the increase in COVID numbers going to hospital and also resulting in delayed handover times. And on Boxing Day, the London Ambulance Service recorded one of its busiest days on record as the number of coronavirus patients receiving hospital treatment in the south of England heads towards the April peak as a result of the rapid spread of the new strain of the virus. And the First Minister touched upon Hogmanay in her opening statement, but can the First Minister reiterate the best ways for people to keep themselves and also their loved ones safe tomorrow and prevent our NHS and also ambulance services from being overwhelmed?
First Minister.
Can I thank Stuart McMillan and also take the opportunity to recognise the job that our paramedics and ambulance service staff do all year round, and particularly at this time of year when even without a global pandemic to contend with, as all our emergency services are particularly busy. And I know they have the gratitude and appreciation of all of us. But this Christmas and New Year period, they are particularly busy because of the pressures of COVID. We obviously, and I know they share this view, don't want any unnecessary delays in ambulance staff transferring patients to hospital, and we continue to work closely with health boards and the ambulance service to work in real time to resolve any issues that do arise there. But let me reiterate in response to Stuart McMillan's question that the best way for all of us to protect frontline staff right now, including the ambulance service, is by minimising the transmission of COVID. So again, my message for Hogmanay is tough, it's difficult for everybody, but it is simple and vital. We shouldn't mix indoors with other households. Please bring in the new year in your own home with your own household only. And that is the best way we can protect the NHS and get ourselves into the new year on as safe a basis as possible.
Ian Gray, to be followed by Emma Harper.
Thank you. I've listened very carefully to what the First Minister has said about her thinking on schools, but one of the things which parents and school staff are worried about is reports they've seen that the new strain of COVID not only spreads more quickly, but also more readily targets young or affects young people. Can the First Minister update us on the evidence she has in that particular regard and how that is shaping her thinking with regard to reopening schools?
First Minister.
I don't yet have definitive or conclusive evidence one way or the other on that. That is something that, I think in the last session before Christmas, I talked a little bit about this, that experts are exploring and investigating. But it is absolutely one of the things that is influencing our thinking about schools and making us even more cautious on that front. There is no doubt about that. The faster spread of this new strain would be doing that anyway, but any suggestion that it may be more likely to infect young people adds to that caution, and that's why we are continuing to take these decisions with the utmost care. We will do it as quickly with as much notice as possible if there are changes to what we've already set out, but we will do it with safety of children and, of course, their teachers and other staff absolutely at the forefront of our minds.
Emma Harper, to be followed by Donald Cameron.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. There's been a sharp rise in COVID-19 positive cases of the new strain across Wigtonshire and South Annandale and Dumfries and Galloway over Christmas. Can the First Minister provide an update on what additional steps are being taken by the Scottish Government and NHS D&G in light of this increase, and whether there is any indication of the causes and cases being connected as they're 96 miles apart? And given that we're seeing evidence of the impact that travel in and out of the country is having on the spread of the virus, would the Scottish Government consider asking the UK Government to close or tighten external borders for all but essential travel?
First Minister.
Well, in terms of Dumfries and Galloway, the incident management team there is meeting daily at the moment to address the situation. I also understand that the Local Resilience Partnership is meeting this afternoon to consider the concurrent risks arising from the outbreak. There's been an increase in testing capacity to provide an additional 200 testing spaces per day in Stranraer, the Stranraer area for this week. So a number of steps are being taken and more will be done as required. In terms of travel, I couldn't be clearer. People should not be travelling right now unless it is absolutely essential. And there are a number of layers to that. None of us, unless it's essential, should be travelling far from home at all. Stay at home or as close to home as possible. There is a legal restriction on travelling outside your own local authority area unless it is essential. Travel across the England-Scotland border or between Scotland and other parts of the UK and vice versa, again, do not do it unless you absolutely can't avoid it for essential purposes. And that applies to overseas travel as well. This is a global pandemic, and we must take all of this advice on travel very, very seriously. So please stay at home, stay as close to home. That will help us get through these next difficult few weeks as we then hopefully, through the news on vaccine today, get to these brighter times in the spring next year that we are all desperate to see.
Thank you. Donald Cameron, to be followed by Sandra White.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In light of the welcome news today about the Oxford vaccine, what steps is the government taking to ensure health boards are coordinating delivery of both available vaccines, especially when it comes to rural and remote parts of Scotland, such as the Highlands and Islands? And can the First Minister be more specific about the role of GPs when it comes to wider community vaccination?
First Minister.
It is part and parcel of the vaccination plan that different vaccines with different logistical requirements will have to be delivered. So that is mainstreamed into that plan and hardwired throughout it. As everybody knows, and in many ways, the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine is much easier logistically to deliver than the Pfizer one. So that allows or it makes it easier to get it to communities, rural communities included, to GP practices and to then open up much speedier vaccination of different groups. We will also use, where necessary and appropriate, mobile vaccination units, which again will help health boards take the vaccine to some of the more remote and rural parts of the country. So this is a fully integrated plan that recognises some of the different requirements with the different vaccines, and hopefully before too long there will be further vaccines that are approved for supply as well. One point I perhaps should have made earlier on in response to another question about the numbers of vaccinators. We are of course starting to get to the end of the flu vaccination programme, so people who are doing the flu vaccination switch over to the COVID vaccination. But these plans are well developed, they will be kept under literally daily review, and we are absolutely focused on getting the vaccine as quickly as is feasible and as supplies allow to as many people as possible.
Sandra White, to be followed by Pauline McNeill.
Thank you. Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, whilst COVID-19 is quite rightly at the forefront of people's minds, I do think it is crucial that we encourage anyone with a health concern not to put off accessing the NHS. Can the First Minister therefore provide any further support to this message which I'm taking, and give assurances that our NHS is open to everyone who has any health concerns?
First Minister.
Can I thank Sandra White for a really important question? Before I come on to it, just to round off my last answer, the Health Secretary is reminding me that she is writing today to all MSPs with an update on the vaccination programme, and will do the same again next week. So that will be information I'm sure that will be helpful. On Sandra White's very important point, it is vital to stress to people that the NHS, although it has been restricted in the last few months in terms of what it's doing, it is open for those who need it. GP practices remain open and accessible for patients. They are at the forefront of our community services to deal with non-COVID medical care. NHS 24 also continues to provide support to people when their GP practice is closed, and people with urgent but not life-threatening conditions who would usually visit A&E can now call NHS 24 day or night, and that means people should continue to call 999 or go directly to A&E in emergencies. For anyone receiving treatment, strict infection and prevention control measures are in place for you to attend an appointment. But if anybody has individual concerns about safety, clinical teams are there to provide the necessary assurance so patients feel safe. Public messaging is currently being delivered via NHS 24's Show You Care, Prepare campaign, and the Right Care, Right Place campaign will increase its reach across the public over the course of January. But the main message to people right now is that the NHS is open if you need it. So if you need it, you should use it.
Pauline McNeill, to be followed by Christine Graham.
Does the wonderful news on the AstraZeneca vaccine bring the timetable for full rollout of vaccine or 75% closer? And am I right to assume that there is a detailed modelling within the government somewhere as to where you'd hope to be, perhaps in March, April or May? I noted, First Minister, that you've already said that adults over 50 would be expected to be vaccinated by the spring. But on checking that, I realised that the spring is actually as late as June the 21st, so it would be helpful to get confirmation of that, and also what the First Minister think we can all do to make sure that the take-up of the vaccine is maximised.
First Minister.
The news today will allow us to significantly accelerate that first priority list of the JCVI, which we had hoped to do by spring, during the spring. Obviously, some of the flexibility around those dates are due to the fact that we still don't have complete certainty over the supplies we get and when we get them, and that remains true of the AstraZeneca vaccine. But as we get that, we can start to make these predictions and expectations much more concrete. But that, just to remind members, that first priority list of the JCVI is effectively anybody over the age of 50, and after that we move on to the rest of the population. So there are two good news things that have happened today: the new vaccine, which will deliver greater doses for us to use, and also the new advice on the two-dose, the interval between the two doses. The fact that the JCVI had advised that we held back 50% of all available doses right now to do the second dose for everybody within 3 weeks. We no longer have to do that, so we've got more doses of our existing supply available to vaccinate more people with the first shot of the vaccine. So we need to work out, once we've got greater certainty on the delivery schedules, exactly what that means for numbers over what time frame. But there's no doubt that today's news will mean more people being vaccinated more quickly than we anticipated when I last stood here last week.
Christine Graham, to be followed by John Scott.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I refer to the current Level 4 travel exceptions, in particular for outdoor informal exercise up to 5 miles from your local authority boundary, which some people are interpreting as 5 miles as the crow flies, not what the odometer reads? This week at Flotterstone, in my constituency, the car park was jammed as folk took to the Pentland Hills, conflicting with your entreaty, First Minister, to stay home, stay close to home. Can I ask, therefore, that this particular exception on travel is reconsidered in any review of Level 4, as it doesn't seem to me to be essential?
First Minister.
We'll obviously keep all of these things under review, given the circumstances we face, but we've tried to strike a balance on the exemption to the travel restrictions for exercise, and that balance is between the steps we need to take to prevent spread of the virus, but recognising the health and well-being benefits of exercise. That balance allows local outdoor informal exercise, walking, cycling or running, which starts and finishes at the same place, and that can be up to 5 miles from the boundary of your local authority area. But I would appeal to people only to do that if it is necessary, and as far as possible to exercise as close to home as possible. I cannot stress enough the importance right now of all of us staying at home as much as possible and staying as close to home as possible. That really will help us to avoid the spread of the virus. And of course, in direct response to Christine Graham, we will keep all of this under ongoing review.
John Scott, to be followed by Sarah Boyack.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And with the new variant strain of COVID on the rise, which of course is immensely concerning, nonetheless, ICU and other hospital beds have thankfully not been overwhelmed. So can the First Minister tell us what impact the arrival of new variant COVID-19 has on detecting and treating of other, regrettably, more routine diseases, such as cancer and other illnesses, particularly in Ayrshire? And will these other diseases still continue to be treated as well in Ayrshire and across Scotland?
First Minister.
Well, hopefully, the more we can suppress this strain of the virus, and this was true of the previous strains of the virus, the more we can protect our NHS from being overwhelmed. Right now, the figure I gave today is 60-something patients in ICU. As of today, the peak back in April in ICU for Scotland was 200. So we are significantly below that. But it has been rising again, and with the case numbers that we are seeing, particularly yesterday and today, we have a concern that that number will rise quite significantly in the period ahead. So that makes it all the more important that we, all of us, take the responsibility to suppress the virus very, very seriously. It's really important also that health boards do prioritise non-COVID care, and I won't repeat everything I've said previously about NHS remobilisation, but it has been made clear to health boards that they must maintain urgent elective and vital cancer services, and that now includes national cancer screening programmes. So this is, unfortunately, we've had to make lots of invidious trade-offs during the course of this pandemic, but the priority now, and the vaccine will help us, because the priority list for the vaccine recognises that we don't yet know whether it limits transmission, but we do know that it suppresses severe disease. So therefore, as it rolls out, that should also help us keep the COVID pressure off of our NHS and particularly off of ICU. None of this is straightforward, and those who are bearing the burden of this are those in the front line of our National Health Service, and it is for all of them, as well as for ourselves and each other, that I really do continue to appeal to people to do the right thing, particularly over this next period.
And Sarah Boyack.
First Minister, could you publish the rate of progress in terms of vaccination in our care homes? Many care home relatives are still understandably anxious, and just to be able to see how many are being vaccinated, both in terms of staff and residents, I think would be very important in terms of people's morale going forward.
First Minister.
We will be publishing more of a breakdown of the progress of vaccination. Right now, we are publishing on a weekly basis the total numbers that have received vaccination. So as of Sunday, that was over 92,000. It will be a fair bit higher than that as of now. We are, with any figures that we publish, we have to make sure they are robust and reliable. So as we do that, we will produce breakdowns of that in different settings. And that obviously will include care homes, but care homes will be one of the first parts of this vaccination programme, because it was one of the first to get underway, will be one of the first that is completed, and we hope that that will be very soon.
Thank you very much. That concludes our statement. Before we conclude our business, I've got a point of order from Jenny Mara. Jenny Mara.
Presiding Officer, I don't think my vote was recorded on the final motion. My app didn't connect, and I tried to make a point of order through the chat function, but I think it was the wrong one. I would have voted yes to the final motion. I'm going to ask you if you can please record my vote.
Thanks, Ms Mara. I will make your vote will be noted for the official report. I'm afraid I can't change the vote. There is a gap between the moment members vote and when I announce the vote. I can't change it after that. However, you have made the point of order. That will now be in the official record. Thank you very much for that point of order. And there are no further votes this evening, so can I thank members very much for attending this recalled sitting of Parliament. Can I wish you all a very peaceful New Year. I look forward to seeing you all again in 2021. I close this meeting.